And now, once again, Richard Thomas.
Gertrude Stein penned the famous line, "A rose is a rose is a rose." But Gertrude was wrong. A rose isn't always a rose. Sometimes it can be the sign of a miracle. In 1984, 22-year-old Jim Shea of Lee, Massachusetts, had a promising future. A straight-A student, he had just graduated from college with a degree in carpentry. His sister Barbara remembers.
Jim was a typical 22-year-old who had a lot of life ahead of him and a lot of plans. He really wanted to plan a building business. That was his biggest dream, was to build homes around this area. And furniture. He always loved to build furniture.
And then, late one night, while returning from inspecting a house he'd built, Jim fell asleep at the wheel. Jim suffered massive injuries, including brain damage, when his head slammed against solid steel. When the news reached his mother, Anne Shea, she gathered her family and hurried to the hospital.
By the time we got there, he had had the last rites. He was in the operating room for, I don't know how many hours, maybe 6 or 8.
The Shea family waited anxiously while Jim was in surgery. When he was finally wheeled out of the operating room, he was in a coma, barely clinging to life. His sister Nancy was shocked by his condition.
He did not look like himself. He had a lot of fluid buildup in him from trying to keep him alive.
He got massive head trauma.
His head was bandaged up, and that was the biggest thing, was his head injury.
Spinal injuries, we don't have a
One of the nurses quickly took the sheet and put it over Jim's head. She didn't want us to see Jimmy. All I did was think about paralysis or death. That's all I could think of.
Jim's doctor, Lawrence Cohen, offered little hope.
From my perspective, if he was going to survive, it would have been in a vegetative state, just a prolonged, non-communicative, and more or less hopeless state.
Jim was strapped to a rotating bed so that his circulation would not stop. Machines were feeding him and breathing for him. His temperature was high enough to kill a healthy man. James Powers Shea was in another world, far away from this one, and he hovered there, unable to return.
I overheard nurses saying that they were praying that he would die because he was so severely injured, that it would be a blessing that he would be dead.
You felt hurt. I would cry every day.
It was an awful day. It was a long time. You felt like you lost him.
The neurosurgeon's prognosis was grim because Jim had been so severely injured. He just said it's a wait-and-see game, but he really didn't think that he would ever come back.
While doctors held out little hope, the Shea family refused to give up.
We stayed night and day at the hospital, just taking turns, stimulating Jim in any way we could by talking to him, playing music for him, putting posters, cards on the wall. Jim was looking at the ceiling and he needed to see something.
It's your mother, Jimmy.
He was non-responsive for about 6 weeks. And then very gradually, he started to, what they call, lighten from a coma. And gradually, he would start to respond a little bit.
Jim had astounded the experts by emerging from his coma, but his mind was still encased in a fog.
He was able to look at me and know that he knew me, but he still didn't know my name. He hadn't had a clue where he was from. He was like an alien from another planet.
He didn't recognize us. Just had a blank stare in his face. The toughest part was looking at him and not knowing whether he was going to be a vegetable or not.
It was suggested by a few professionals that we should seek out a nursing home, saying that a person like this who's been so severely injured, the chances of him coming back were pretty slim. And especially as far as his building talents, carpentry talents, they were gone. And I was told by many people, forget it, he'll never get those back.
2 weeks after he woke from his coma, Jim was transferred to the Health South Braintree Rehabilitation Hospital near Boston.
Jim had a rigorous schedule there from 8 a.m. until sometimes 6 at night. He had to learn how to eat, walk, talk, recognize things. The months went by and things seemed to stay about the same. Jim was still in his wheelchair, going to his rehab classes, making very small improvements. And no one knew if he was going to get any better at all. He just, for months, he would be at that level.
They did not think he would make it. We didn't think he would, but yet we were hoping he would. Lots of prayers, many prayers.
The Shea family were devout Catholics, and Jim's mother prayed to every saint she could think of. Well, it appears that one of them was listening and would soon send her a remarkable and surprising sign. I think you'll be just as surprised. We'll be right back. While driving home late one night, 22-year-old Jim Shea fell asleep at the wheel. In the next instant, his body was broken and his mind had slipped into a coma. Jim's doctors held out little hope that he would live, and if he did, it would be in a vegetative state. But his family rallied around him, and his mother began praying to all the saints, and in particular, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, the little flower. Saint Teresa was a Carmelite nun who died in 1897 at the age of 24. She was believed to have been responsible for many miraculous cures, and in each one, a rose or the smell of roses would precede the miracle. Jim's mother prayed again and again to receive the sign of the rose.
St. Teresa, the little flower, please send me a rose from your heavenly garden and send it to me with a message of love. I said, please send me a rose and let me know Jimmy is going to be all right sometime. And I said them and said them and said them, and nothing happened.
But Anne continued to pray. And then, on a cold day in November of 1984, Barbara was driving her mother to visit Jim when they received the sign Anne had been waiting for.
Mom and I drove to Braintree, and as we drove into the parking lot, there was a red rose growing out of a snowbank.
And I said, oh my, Barbara, look at that rose. She said, so? I said, Barbara, I've been praying to St. Teresa for a sign that he's going to be all right.
I had to take a double take. I didn't quite believe it. I have never seen a rose, or any other flower for that matter, growing in Massachusetts in the wintertime. It's unheard of. I picked it and knew that this was definitely a sign that my brother would be healed. I just knew it, and I'm sure she did too.
Barbara and Anne took the rose with them into the hospital.
Up until this very day that we saw the rose, Jim did not recognize us at all.
Oh, Jim.
Jim met us at the door of Braintree Hospital that day, walking and talking, and he recognized who we were.
What are you doing out here?
I'm Mom.
Oh, Jim.
Hi, Barb.
This was just an incredible event to see my brother doing what was told by professionals he would never do. I was just joyful, and Mom was very joyful. I was in tears for happiness for him, and Mom knew her prayer had been answered.
Overnight, Jim had miraculously broken through. He was aware of the world. He recognized the family that surrounded him. He was truly alive again.
Day by day, he improved. He had to use a walker at times because his muscles weren't strong enough, but day by day, he definitely improved.
Jim spent the next 3 years completing his rehabilitation. And in 1987, he finally returned home. Shortly after, he paid a visit to his original doctor, Lawrence Cohen.
And this young man walked in and thanked me for operating on him. I was just absolutely dumbfounded, overwhelmed, and overjoyed. It was extraordinary.
It was just a long, hard job. It just took time and patience to get me through. You know, it took forever.
Today, Jim lives with his mother in Lee, Massachusetts. While he still feels some side effects from his ordeal, incredibly, he never lost his ability to build. In his workshop, he creates furniture that is museum quality.
He continues to build his furniture. It's beautiful. He's got a good sense of humor. He's got a great laugh. He is a new person, and he is here. Through, I think, a miracle. A miracle because the doctors told us he wouldn't walk, he wouldn't talk.
When the accident first happened, it was a nightmare. It was a horrible, horrible nightmare. And then as we went through the whole process, I realized that behind every tragedy, there's a gift, if you just open your eyes and look. I think prayer is extremely powerful as medicine. It's amazing, and it is a miracle.